But generally, I find that high school athletes are not eating enough. So they have to eat food and prioritize the importance of fueling your body for optimal wellness. Now, what does that look like? Number two is that they are definitely consuming too much sugar. And how do I know this? Because I see the acne all over these girls' faces. And the acne is a hormonal response to the food that you're eating. My mentor said dairy and sugar are the number one causes of acne in teenagers, and teenagers do not have to have acne. They don't. I again witnessed it in my daughter. Um, when she did go on vacation or something and indulged in a lot of ice cream or whatever it was, she got acne, and she realized, okay, um, here is the what happened, and here's the consequence. So I ate the dairy and sugar all week. Now I have acne, and now what mom says was right. It's not just a study; it actually is true. I recommend if females have acne around their mouth, particularly the chin mouth area, this is a big sign of PCOS. PCOS is a major issue amongst our female athletes today. PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. And basically, what it means is that it's a metabolic issue that's happening inside their ovaries. Now, I'm trying to break it down really simple so everyone can understand. So what happens is we need insulin. Insulin is a hormone as well. We need it to put away the glucose that we get in our body, usually from carbohydrates. So if you eat a lot of candy, eat a lot of sugar, you get a glucose spike in your blood, which is where people think the power and the speed, etc., are coming from, the quick energy. Yes, it is possible for our body to use that as quick energy. But what happens is we consume, generally as a population, too many carbohydrates. And so when you have nutritionists and dietitians saying, oh yeah, you need 300, 400 grams of carbohydrates, and then they become, because our bodies are very adaptable, they become carbohydrate adapted, and that's what they need to fuel themselves. They need constant replenishment and then constant more carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates. These are sugars that go into their blood. And over time, they get a condition called insulin resistance. And that means that their receptors in their cells are overstimulated and can no longer produce the insulin needed to put the sugar away. It gets stored as body fat, and it also impacts how the oocyte, the little egg cell that we're born with millions of them, how that develops into an egg and produces ovulation. So that's how that works. So basically, you need insulin to mature that egg or that oocyte into an egg. So with conditions like PCOS, girls who then become women become infertile because their eggs are not producing to maturation. It also causes and that is also because this lack of insulin, creates an imbalance when they can't ovulate in increasing testosterone. So then they end up with too much testosterone, which is also referred to as an androgen, if you're looking this up. And that creates the acne around the mouth, usually. It's called perioral dermatitis. So that hormone imbalance is going to affect your menstrual cycles. It's going to affect your mood. It's going to affect your fatigue levels, that sort of thing. On the flip side, too much body fat caused by the insulin not working can also hold too much estrogen. Excess estrogen gets stored in the adipose tissue, which is the body fat tissue, and that becomes toxic. So basically, there are a couple different methods with the estrogen overdominance, and I'll talk about that in a second. But again, we're pinpointing it to too much carbohydrates and too much sugar, because what happens if you eat a fat-forward, protein-forward diet, and I'm going to say protein first, because protein is most important in my experience with clients. Fat second. Ketogenic diets are very healing, but eventually you need the protein. So, and also the dairy, maybe cut out the dairy because that's inflammatory and causes the acne. We have to remember that most regular dairy comes from pregnant cows, and it's for their children, for their baby cows, their children, And so that has hormones in it. It actually has a lot of estrogen in it, particularly. So that can cause things like estrogen dominance as well, which can lead to fibroids, another common condition in the uterus, hormone imbalance. And that can be like, heavy periods and that sort of thing. So the protein first and then the fats. And that is because when you start to become protein fat adapted, your liver produces the glucose that you need for your blood. It's called gluconeogenesis. And if you talk to any nutritionist, they'll tell you that is not the fastest way to produce energy. It's not the most optimal way to produce energy. It's not the best way to produce. You absolutely cannot create ATP that way because it just takes too long to go through that process. And what I'm telling you is that I have seen with my clients and myself, but hey, what do I know? I just ran faster in my 40s than I did, in college as a Division I athlete. But what do I know?
Me too, Cynthia. My speed times have gone through the roof, and I've heard people say with focusing on high protein, high fat, they feel like Superman, and I can definitely attest to that. It's pretty wild, and I'm still very shocked by the whole thing. But your power output is just amazing, and I
Yes.
continue to be surprised by it by the day. And you feel better when you're older than when you were a college athlete, and it's just pretty fascinating.
It is. And I think a lot of that has to do with the college lifestyle, and the eating situation is very inflammatory. So it's twofold with that. You're eating the grains and the simple sugars are very inflammatory to your body. And what I've found as an older athlete is the less inflammation that you have, and you can use supplements, but also just mostly with your food you're eating. The less inflammation you have, the more efficient you are, and the more powerful you are, and the better you feel overall. So this protein fat adaptation is actually giving you a longer sustained energy because when you use fat for fuel, you get more kilocalories, you get more energy from the fuel. And so if you're able to sustain that, for instance, I work with an Olympic heptathlete and decathlete, and they're able to sustain, they go for hours, like 5 hours for over 2 days to do all these events. It's not just one competition or one race or one soccer match. Like they need that sustained energy. So what they found is that this type of fat protein adaptation, and for some people it can take as little as a couple days, and other people it takes 2 weeks. But you were correct in giving it 6 months. I say 3 months is usually enough to be able to figure out what's going on in your system. 6 months is great.
Do
But
you recommend athletes do this when they're not in the middle of games and competitions, when they have some
yeah,
time off to adapt and experiment with
so
it?
yes, good point. Off season is always your off season, preseason are always your times to experiment with anything with diet and supplement changes in general. So the reason why is because if you are carbohydrate adapted, and say you're a track athlete or a soccer athlete, and you're getting ready to have a game tomorrow, you don't want to today just consume a steak and some nuts and that sort of thing because you're not adapted. And so your body is looking for that carbohydrate fuel because that's what it's used to utilizing for fuel. So you want to give it some time to adapt to this new process of teaching your liver that it needs to use this stored glycagon to make glucose, if that makes sense. The other thing is that when these nutritionists and dietitians are promoting this high sugar, high carbohydrate type diet, they're really putting the athlete's general health at risk because we know that everything from sugar consumption increasing cancer cells by feeding the cancer cells. I think an article just came out about 10 days ago or so about ketogenic diets and cancer, and it turned out that it was mostly mouse models, but it turned out that it starved the cancer cells of the sugar and promoted a better outcome. So that was a really interesting article because it just confirmed all the different types of processes that go on with adapting a high fat diet, which I'll talk more about that too. But so they're putting their health at risk because there's also genetic mutations in all of us, and some of them predispose us to things like Alzheimer's. There's a reason why Alzheimer's is called type 3 diabetes. It's because it's directly related to insulin and insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. And so, if you have a certain genetic variation, then an ApoE variation, then you are less likely to be able to metabolize glucose. So, these nutritionists and dietitians are not taught this. They are just basically setting you up for possible chronic illness. The third thing is I've seen in young athletes is fatty liver disease, fatty tissue on the liver. And you can look at a girl and she looks super fit. She looks skinny, we'll say. She looks like she's not fat. How is she getting this fatty tissue on her liver? She doesn't eat a lot of fat. She eats non-fat, high carbohydrate, just like the nutritionist says. Plenty of plant-based products, maybe even plant-based protein, which, I'm going to tell you, garbage. So
It's
um,
fake.
it's not easily absorbed by the body. It's full of GMOs and pesticides and all kinds of toxins, and it doesn't create the same. It's lacking in leucine, which is the main muscle tissue building amino acid. So it's garbage. Like,
And
just
it lacks carnosine, carnitine. It's just
yeah,
everything.
all things, uh, particularly red meat, animal based protein diet.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so you've got these basically these sugary diseases. So the fatty tissue on the liver, why is that important? It's because the lipids are getting stuck basically in the liver cells, and then the liver can't do its job. So and the liver is important for all kinds of things, but mostly, guess what? It regulates insulin, which you need, as we talked about, to make sure that you're ovulating correctly and your hormones are balanced. For one thing, like, insulin is involved in many different pathways. Um, so that's a little bit about basically the myths that are out there about high sugar and how you can experiment yourself. And people think, okay, well, maybe this is not long term though. What about heart disease? Well, for instance, red meat is high in carnitine, which, if you look at any of the research, carnitine is excellent for preventing heart disease. If you look at people that have been on a carnivore diet, because it's been popular now for about like maybe 6, 7 years. Dr. Sean Baker, who's the author of the carnivore diet, he's been
I love
strictly,
him.
yeah,
Love
he's
him.
a really fun personality. He's just really, he came to visit me, and he's just like really even. I don't know how else to explain it, but he's like a really cool, even guy, and you can tell that not only does he believe passionately in what he believes in, but he's he's basically like not non-emotional about it, but it's like just the way it is kind of thing. He's not like attacking anybody personally and that sort of thing. He's just like a cool cucumber who's just really interested in helping other people. And I can tell you that because you can hear the truth in his voice. And you can, somebody once told me, like, truth is a frequency, and people recognize that frequency when they hear it and see it. So I just really feel like um, I appreciate the work he's done to help people heal their bodies through an animal protein based diet. And he'll even tell you, like, you don't have to do it forever. I choose to not eat any carbohydrates, but that everybody's choice is their own if they want to add a little bit here and there and that sort of thing. And and I'm not strictly carnivore myself, but I am on a heavy animal protein based diet, which has made me thrive for in my 40s for sure, and my athletes as well. So yes, so I appreciate that, people like him are out there to set an example and give us some information and break it down. And yeah, so um,
So
what,
yeah, I love Dr. Sean Baker, and it seems like a lot of the doctors in that carnivore ketogenic community, when they talk, they're just super like chill and stoic. And my theory is it's because the fat is so good for the brain and your mood regulation and cutting out that sugar and just being in this very like peaceful, content state. And just beyond like the physical benefits I've noticed from all of this, I think the brain has been the number one. And just that constant energy through the day, not those crazy highs and lows that you get from sugar and simple carbohydrates, but just that constant energy, that constant clarity and sharpness of mind has been the biggest one. And I think we should maybe dive into the conversation on why fats are so important, because I know a lot of our young girls are avoiding fats at all costs. There's this big misconception around fats that they make you fat, they're terrible for your body comp, when actually it's the opposite if you're getting good animal-based fatty acids. So, do you want to get into fats a little bit?
Sure. It does still. Yes, let's talk about that. Let's break down exactly what you said. So you say it's better for your brain. So there's a few reasons why. Um, there's a type of, okay. Most people don't talk about it, and the nutritionists and dietitians are definitely, not to just keep picking on them. It's not their fault. I'm not mad at them. It's not their fault. They're just not taught the in-depth information. So the type of bacteria that we produce. And if you didn't know, we hold about 3 pounds of microbacteria, microorganisms in our body and on our body. So the type of bacteria that you produce changes with what you eat and the type of exercise you do. So when you do a ketogenic type high fat diet, you actually produce a bacteria called Akkermansia muciniphila, which has been shown to be neuroprotective. So that good cognitive feeling that you get is because of that, but also because it's sparking different neurotransmitters. So if you eat fats like nuts, have choline, and the choline is the precursor to acetylcholine, which helps you have lasting energy throughout the day. When you have sugar for breakfast, it sparks a bunch of serotonin and a bunch of dopamine, like high in the air, kind of like as if you're doing drugs. Some people have heard this, like the same effect on your brain that sugar has is the same as drugs. It's because of this neurotransmitter spike. So what happens is it spikes it way, way, way up, and then you drop way, way, way down. And you need, with drugs, same as sugar, you need more to feel the same type of happiness that you felt the first time. And so I always say it's kind of not anybody's, it's not their fault if they want a donut at 10 o'clock in the morning if they ate cereal or oatmeal or something high carb pancakes or waffles or whatever for breakfast. So when you eat something like red meat for breakfast with maybe a handful of nuts, which is the Charles
That's what
Cullen
I
cookie,
eat now for breakfast every
yeah,
single day. Ribeye, I keep the fat on. I tons of fatty meat is what I've thrived off of, and I think you do the same, right? You have steak for breakfast
yeah,
and
I actually
before you sprint.